Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. I'm going to talk a little bit about this new anthology which has come into my hands. But let me begin with a bit of a caveat. Somewhere in his criticism, T.S. Eliot writes that one should always bear in mind that when a poet is writing literary criticism, he is judging other works of poetry according to the types of poetry that he himself would write or is capable of writing. And I think that sort of general warning is due when I talk about something like this. I am really not going to review the anthology or give any kind of a comprehensive view of the book as a thing in itself. For one thing, I do not read books of poetry from cover to cover unless it's a work such as Dante's Divine Comedy, something, an epic poem meant to be read that way. For anthologies, even for individual collections of poetry, I will just let the book open as it may and read an individual poem here or there. And I have done that with this book. But I have given a bit of a glance through the entire book. And so I will give you some of my general impressions. But first, I suppose to, clarify my bias or my biases most precisely. Let me read a little something from this old book, which always meant a lot to me, Chief Modern Poets of Britain and America. This is volume 1, just the poets of Britain. But there is a general introduction to both volumes. I've talked about these on my channel somewhere, but I doubt that I could find it. So I'll just let you hear how the topic is introduced. British and American poetry of this century no longer needs defending. The age of Yeats has produced work equal in beauty and brilliance to that of any of the other great literary periods of our language. Rich in experimentation, this age has also been rich in the revitalization of poetic traditions. Moreover, throughout its tumultuous history, there has run a quiet, pure stream of lyricism undefiled that has had its source in the early beginnings of English poetry. This anthology, intended for students, aims to give a balanced view of the many-sided modern achievement. The superb daring of a Pound or Eliot on the one hand, and the more conventionally contained power of a Frost or Stevens or Muir on the other, are, with many other contrasting values, essential to our poetic scene. Since its first pioneering edition in 1929, Chief Modern Poets of England and America has sought to represent this scene in some depth by selecting a reasonable number of outstanding poets and giving enough of the best work of each to provide a meaningful context for any one poem. The advantages for study and appreciation over the usual anthology practice of providing a few feasts and a vast number of passing nibbles should, we hope, be clear. In our selection of poets and poems, the primary standard has been excellence, with some attention to current informed opinion and to various further considerations useful to intelligent study. Thus, the inclusion of Emily Dickinson and Gerard Manley Hopkins, though it violates the principle of representing only poets whose main achievement is of this century, seems necessary because they came into their own only in our age. They lived before their time. Their poetry is more truly ours than that of many writers still living. Again, since Yeats so dominates the age, it is especially valuable to gain a ground sense of his development over a long career, during which his whole method and way of thinking changed dynamically. Lawrence is significant not only in his own right, but also because of his great influence on later poets, and so forth, ... This is the kind of thing I have come to expect and prefer to find in a poetry anthology. That is to say, something that sets forth in a clear manner the criteria for selecting poems and the parameters of what the anthology is going to be about. This set of two books is pretty unique in that it focuses on a fewer number of poets with healthy selections from each poet, as opposed to, what did he say, the sort of anthology which provides a few feasts and then a lot of nibbles. Well, this book only gives you nibbles, and it is very hard to understand exactly what the selection process consisted of, other than sort of an agreed upon eclecticism of its two editors, George Abraham and Noor Hindi, both of whom include their own works in the anthology. Mr. U will not be missed, who as an anthologist sold the many on the few, not excluding Mr. U. But aside from that, it's hard to get a sense. One has the sense that it is focusing on more recent poetry, but then there is at least one poem that I saw from the 1940s translated. It seems to be specifically focused on poems written originally in English, but then there is a smattering. There's poems translated from Arabic and from French and so forth. Both George Abraham and Noor Hindi are referred to in the back cover blurb as Palestinian American poets. And so the outlook is very definitely from the, what is it called, the Anglo-sphere. I don't know these terminologies, and I will be talking about the poetry tangentially, but not using the proper terminology, I suppose. I'm largely retired from the practice of poetry, but if you are familiar with my poetry, you will see that most of my verse falls along the spectrum at the end of what is referred to often as formalist poetry, formulaic, perhaps, but I have never seen it in such a way. I look at what I write as simply poetry, but one must acknowledge that there is a great variety of different sorts of poetry. This book seems to cover a pretty broad swath. However, that sort of formalistic poetry is not in here at all. There you will not find a sonnet or anything like that. But beyond that, you find, I think, a pretty good variety. A lot of prose poems, for example, and some even going into, I think, what John Frederick Nims referred to as concrete poetry. That is poetry that's not really poetry, but sort of a visual impression on the page. I'm not really sure about the terminology or the lingo. Literary criticism is not my forte, although I like it. So I thought I would read a little bit of the introductory matter to this book. And as I say, I'm not going to read any of the poems. I've read a couple. Let me just read you one poem, which is possibly the most famous contemporary poem of them all. This is by, and forgive me in all cases if I mispronounce the names, Refat al-Arir, If I Must Die. If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze, and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. If I must die, let it be a tale. I think I have read this poem on this channel in some context or another. The poet was a victim to the genocide in Gaza. And so the poem has had a great distribution. That said, you will find in this book that there are no feasts and then a bunch of nibbles. It's mainly a lot of nibbles. It's the sort of anthology where each poet is given maybe one poem, maybe two poems. Inclusivity is the theme. And it really is, as I say, an odd assortment. You will find, I think there are two poems in here by Mahmoud Darwish, who I've done a couple of videos on, the most famous Palestinian poet here in the West. But there are other names that are quite well known. But here I might as well read from the introduction a little bit, because they explain, the editors explain their selection process in effusive, subjective terms. And I might add that the introduction itself reads almost as an extended prose poem. I mean, the feelings which come from this introduction, trying to establish the poems in place and also put forth the impressionistic justifications behind the anthology. These words are sometimes highly fraught and charged with emotion, or at least they provoke the emotion in the reader. So let me just read a little bit. I'll read some and then I'll skip over some and then possibly read some more. We are writing from one of the darkest moments of Palestinian history into a future whose shape, let alone existence, is unknowable to us. It is January 2024. We are over 100 days into the latest iteration of Zionist genocide in Gaza, and with the necrotic weight of unknowable thousands of slaughtered kin, each a whole universe of dreams, hopes, wonders, beauties, stolen from us too soon, we sing. After the threshold of apartheid, after the slaughter of arms and white phosphorus became the genocide of bombed hospitals and starving streets, we sing. After realizing the sheer number of times we've been here before, after siege, after impossible siege, after, After Nakba made a repetition of us, after repetition made a Nakba of us, we sing. Poetry for our people has always been a kind of impossible music. We remember Kanafani, who wrote of the Fellahin left behind in the Nakba of 1948, farmers and workers who, in their labor of love to the land, remembered details of our ethnically cleansed villages with field songs. It is here, in a tradition of resisting such annihilation, that our revolutionary verses stake their origin and hail people to join our fight. As Mahmoud Darwish once wrote, "Dust of my country, I rebel for you. Returning brother, I rebel for you." Against a colonial regime that disremembered the basic facts of us via archival looting, theft, and plunder, with both the unwriting and paving over implicit to all acts of erasure. The shape of our memory left behind is not one of empire's narrative telos, but of catastrophe's timeless and fragmented lyric. From the singular wound of our becoming Palestinian, we emerge as mirror and agitator. We live our deaths in exile, trespassing border after failed border, presencing ourselves in every tongue that fails to hold the weight of us, translating wound into word into world. We are writing from the event horizon of another world, and thus the times are filled impossibly with terror. Let us be clear. We come not to present institutionally sanitized, stakesless poetry, as is typical in hegemonic Anglophone spaces, especially in the US. We sing as the embodied aftermath of the cost of Western imperial living. We come as swarm, as multitude and multiverse. We come to uncraft, dismantle, and reimagine the imperial tools of language that made our unwriting possible to begin with. We come acknowledging the weight of the slaughtered writers that brought us to this moment. Intellectuals like Ghassan Kanafani and Refat Al-Arir, who terrified the state with their brilliance, journalists like Shireen Abu Akleh, and the over 100 martyred in 2023 alone for witnessing the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Murdered poets like Heba Abu Nada, who, looking death in the face, teach life with every breath. Against a failed literary imagination that can only digest us in death and suffering, against institution after illiterate institution censoring the basic truth of us, against every cowardly writer refusing to speak out, even as poets in our community are kidnapped, imprisoned, tortured, even martyred for their words, we come with the insistence that the Anglophone world bears witness to our living. We sing like the whole world is at stake. We sing because the whole world is at stake. So I've read precious few of these poems, but I hope to catch a little bit of that fervor in the poetry itself. As prose writing, it reads almost at the edge of being a manifesto. Now, what did it say here? We come not to present institutionally sanitized, stakesless poetry, as is typical in hegemonic Anglophone spaces. That may well be true. I would say that it does not apply to this older anthology, because one must remember that while Pound and Eliot and Yeats have become the institutional poets, so to speak, they were not always so. They, each in his own way, were the voices crying in the wilderness of their day, so to speak. Of course, Eliot's great poetry, Prufrock and The Wasteland, spread like wildfire, but with much denigration, condemnation, much vituperation, much criticism, which has not borne the press of time. I've often said I wish an anthology existed of all of the writing done by contemporary poets who hated Eliot with so much of a passion. But perhaps that material is best left to the memory hole of time, I guess you would say. Let me just read a little bit more. Now this, just after a cursory glance, I would say that the poetry in this volume it has overall a very retro feel to it. It reminds me of the poetry that I was reading 45 years ago when I was learning to write. A lot of the poems in here seem to be also fairly gimmicky. That is just, as I say, after a cursory glance. I'm not laying down a verdict about the book. I expect many of these poems, taken individually, will bear unknowable fruits until they have been read and ingested pretty seriously. But let me read a little bit more from this introduction. I've skipped some parts, and I will possibly skip some here. Why I thought about the gimmickry was because even in this introduction, here poetry gives us the miracle of language activated beyond witness and into withness. So that's a bit silly and a bit gimmicky, and I think the editor's selection of poems reflect that predilection, if you will. We are writing from the event horizon of another world, and thus we are writing from the event horizon of the impossible. Although the times in which we write this introduction are imbued with the urgency of the evolving Nakba in Gaza, this project began several years ago in 2020. As editors, we knew there was a significant need for a new anthology of Palestinian poetry in the Anglosphere, especially given the gaps between our vibrant contemporary poetry community and the youngest poets of many post-1990 anthologies, which end with folks like Naomi Shihab Nye or Fadi Joda. Footnote, they are both included in this volume. Perhaps in sort of the positioning of those names, as well as Mahmoud Darwish, perhaps occupy the space analogous to that occupied by Emily Dickinson and Gerard Manley Hopkins in this book. And then the bulk of the poetry is more contemporary. contemporary with us, that is to say. While many anthologies take scholarly approaches that center institutionally lauded poets, as well as those who have already garnered international readership, we know that our future literary community deserves better. Let me just interject here. Of course, my bent is always more for scholarly. I don't see how discounting scholarship makes for a better anthology, even into posterity. As such, we included several authors who have yet to publish widely, alongside elders, some of whom are lauded and some of whom have yet to receive widespread readership. We have chosen to think instead about which people are precious to our community. The writers assembled here are essential activists, intellectuals, artists, and thinkers. We believe that every one of them is crucial to our cause and want to uphold a literature of collaboration, not one of exclusivity or literary polish. Okay, I hadn't really realized till now. So this anthology is more about the celebrities of the poetic scene, so to speak. It is not about the work as such. And so we entered this project as siblings by choice, knowing we needed to do our due diligence to center care in our approach, listening to Palestinian elders and editors to shape our editorial process by centering our communal needs. Now, let me interject here. If you watch Steve Donahue's channel on poetry Thursday, he often goes off on a tear against the anthology that he is reading from, something of contemporary American poems, and he often critiques the selection process with a comment such as some of these poets and some of these poems are included perhaps because of personal connection. I think that may well be the standard practice in American anthologies, and this, of course, is an American anthology. For this, we thank everyone who contributed to this anthology's planning, many of whom are contributors, but especially, and then ... To highlight the intergenerational communal nature of this gathering, the poems are organized into cross-temporal, multilingual, transnational conversations. While certain sections are organized by theme, such as eco-poetics or eco-poetics and love poems, others are organized by formal interests, such as uplifting recent work building on our long lineage of protest poetry, or gathering ars poeticas and other poetic reckonings that enter decades-long conversations on Palestinian, Anglophone, and Arab metapoiesis. I'm not quite sure what that means, but I just wonder if ars poeticas, if that really should be pluralized, arses poetica. Somebody can correct me or apprise me. There are many communities we wish were more present in this anthology. Due to financial and linguistic constraints, there is not nearly as much Arabic in this anthology as we would hope for. Although Arabic, French, Danish, and English are present, we regret the disconnections our U.S. literary sphere creates between Palestinian Anglophones and our siblings in Latin America, who comprise among our biggest communities outside the Middle East globally. A Palestinian Latinx Anthology is a project that deserves its own devoted editorial team with skill sets beyond our own, and we hope that another press or team will take up such a needed project. We hope our anthology serves as one small first step in fostering greater interconnectivity in and beyond our global writing community. We thank our every contributor, wherever you are in the world, for trusting us with your precious words. We encourage every reader to do what they can to fight for Palestinians while we are still living. We are asking you to love us impossibly. So, of course, it probably did not need to be said while we are still living. One hopes that words on a page may fight for us even after we are through living. But the book does not take the poems into that sort of a context. So it seems to me certainly that the moral outlook of this collection cannot be faulted. The poems are, as I say, lumped into sections according to theme. So number 1, our bags are always ready. Number 2, revolution is feminine. Number 3, how I kill soldiers. Number 4, a poem hangs in the balance. An example of sort of the hokiness of some of these poems. Is the whole air the path of the gazelle? That was number 5. Number 6, I loved you without evidence. Beautiful, beautiful title, that one. I loved you without evidence. Seven, bitter English. 8, what I want is never called nation. 9, beit, B-E-I-T, I'm not sure what the word means, for time. And 10, Palestine is a futurism. So let me show you a couple, some of the poems that I picked out just to kind of give you a sense of what I mean by the poetry seems retro or gimmicky. So this is like something you might have expected from E.E. Cummings way back, and I don't know that even in his poems it has proved itself to have great lasting value. Oh, the one we saw on the table of contents. Just, I mean, I'm not saying that that this kind of gimmick can't be justified. This kind of gimmick certainly can be justified. I just tend to approach this sort of thing with a degree of skepticism, or something like this. Also in the prose format, boldface included. I'm always wary of typographical tricks of that sort. So this is just a handful of what the poems look like on the page. And as I say, I have not really delved into the book itself in any great sort of detail. I am, as I say, not giving a review of the anthology, and I will quite possibly return to individual poems as I make my way through this volume. So I will leave off there. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel, and perhaps we will revisit this theme.